Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of Bluegrass. You've enjoyed live Bluegrass at Guitartown CT concerts in Hampton, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite Bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. So I'm very happy to welcome Michael Daves to Got Grass. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me. Nice.
I always start out by asking people, if you have a day off with no music in sight, where would we find you?
Oh, gosh, I don't know what that would be, a day off. Yeah, I enjoyed having some quiet time at home and just kind of catching up. I'm just kind of going constantly, between teaching and gigs and travel and everything, that it's just really nice to have a day of doing nothing. It's very rare.
That is probably the most common answer I've gotten. This is your number 33 episode, and almost everyone I ask says, time off? I don't really take time off. And if I do, I'm usually picking up a guitar or a mandolin or something, just, playing music. So I have a second question, which I will just ask you specifically, which is about Rockwood Music Hall. There was a lot of chatter that it was closing abruptly a few weeks ago. Is that true, or?
Yeah, it closed permanently, as far as I know. And yeah, the news was abrupt, but it wasn't surprising. They had been kind of struggling financially really since coming back from the pandemic. And, I'm not part of that organization, so I can't speak to all of the factors, but, they used to have 3 rooms, stage 1, 2, and 3, and they had shut down, stage 3, which was the basement space, about a year and a half ago, and then shut down stage 2, which was their largest space, about a year ago, and then they were soldiering on with stage 1, which was the original space, and so there was like fundraiser concerts last year that Chris Thile and I were involved in, and a bunch of other artists that had kind of gotten their start there, or kind of had a meaningful connection with the venue over the years, including Sarah Bareilles, the pop star. She's, I think, kind of spearheaded that. And that had only raised enough money for them to be able to not close entirely at that point, but but it's a real sad loss for New York. There was such a great community spot, and for many years, and kind of a musical home to me, and many places, great meeting place, very friendly, artist positive, management, which in a way that's kind of rare. There's like this stereotype of venue owners being sort of like sleazy and trying to take advantage of the artist, or skimp. And I've was always treated so well by all the organizations. So it's real sad. And I know a lot of small independent venues are struggling around the country for some of the same reasons. But people will pay hundreds of dollars to go see Taylor Swift at an arena, but are maybe not supporting the small venues to the same level that they were previously. Yeah,
certainly true here. With people I know in Connecticut that do what I do. I just do it for fun. I don't ever made money at it, but the audiences are, it's tough. I don't know. It's a tough time right now for small venues and live music. So Rockwood closing, because you were artist in residence there for a long time, right? You did a lot of stuff there.
Oh yeah. I started playing there regularly in 2006. They opened, I think, in 2005, and so I was kind of on the ground floor and started playing weekly there in December of 2006, and continued that every Tuesday night up until the pandemic. So that was, I think, like around 600 shows just on the Tuesday nights, and they used to host a monthly jam session there, and then would do periodic shows on the larger stage. If I'd have Brian Sutton or Mike Compton or Chris Elders, someone coming through town, it was a great place to put up a one-off ticketed show. So yeah, I probably played the Rockwood more than any other artist as far as just number of appearances. They would have over 600.
Yeah.
Hard to beat.
So that must be a big sad loss for you, right? I can imagine.
Well, it is sad, but I mean, especially in New York. I mean, venues have a life cycle, and New York City neighborhoods are always changing. And when that opened up on the the Lower East Side in 2005, at a time when that was like a real kind of a center for artists and musicians to meet. There were a lot of other clubs, and then it happened in Greenwich Village after the 60s. Greenwich Village was like the spot, and then it just became gentrified and way too expensive for any normal artist or musician to live. And that sort of happened in the Lower East Side as well. So during the time it was open, that neighborhood changed so much. It was like no longer a place where artists and musicians congregated naturally. They'd come in for the Rockwood, but it wasn't the scene that it was. A lot of that stuff had kind of moved out to well, then the same thing happened in Williamsburg. Brooklyn is now like all high rises, and so it's kind of things moved out to Bushwick. So that's just kind of part of the natural life cycle of venues. So I accept it. It's just sad, and hopefully, other places will spring up. But one venue that's still going strong, that's been around just as long as the Jalopy Theater in Brooklyn, and I still play there. And they're doing, I think, as well as ever. And one of the things they changed, like, I don't know, like 8 years ago, I'm guessing, to a nonprofit model. So that's I think venues are able to do that, like the Parlor Room and Pioneer Valley, Western Mass, Northampton area. Now they run as a nonprofit, and I think One Longfellow Square in Portland, Maine. Right. And so that seems to be like one of the sustainable models for, smaller venues, certainly presenting folk music, which is, has a strong community and strong audience, but, not the sort of broad commercial appeal.
We have the Fairfield Theater Company down in Fairfield, CT, and they're a nonprofit, and they are also struggling. Because I was talking to somebody on the board there recently. There's a lot of competition around them, and even a nonprofit, they're having a hard time making a go of it. Well, anyway, as you say, life goes in waves, and things go and they come. So something new will come along, hopefully. So you've had a pretty great career as a guitarist, singer, and teacher. For the benefit of those who don't really know you, could you just give us your version of your short bio?
Okay,
your version of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of been around, for a while now. I'm 47. I grew up, playing like my parents played fiddle and banjo, so it was in the house, and we used to have a lot of jam sessions and stuff. So that was part of my upbringing. They played mostly old time music, but there was a great bluegrass club in Atlanta called the Freight Room. That was kind of the main spot in Atlanta in like the 90s, when I was growing up, and so that was sort of where I cut my teeth and. And they had a regular jam, and then also, saw a bunch of great shows there, including, Norman Blake and Del McCoury and Tim O'Brien and the O Boys when they were touring. That's where I had my first exposure to Larry Sparks.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Great. That was just like right in my neighborhood growing up. So that was kind of my main engagement with bluegrass. And so in college, and around, before, during, and after college, I was kind of more active in the jazz world, and studied jazz and composition and arranging and improvisation and whatnot in college in Massachusetts, Hampshire College, and then moved to New York City in 2003, and that was kind of the time when I was ready to get back into bluegrass music. And it turns out that there was a really great scene brewing in New York for bluegrass, which I think through the next really up until I'd say about 2015, 2016 was probably one of the best bluegrass scenes in the country for a while there. And I was really lucky to be there, through that, and, part of it, playing regularly, hosting jams, and, Chris Thile moved to New York shortly after I did, and we met and hit it off, and had a duo. We just kind of did shows locally for a while, and then made a record that came out in 2011 called Sleep with One Eye Open. This is a duo like a straight ahead bluegrass record, just kind of in the brother duet mold, kind of, trading on like the Bill Monroe and Doc Watson recordings, Skaggs and Rice, and like the older, like Monroe Brothers and stuff like that. And so that's if that's was sort of how many people were introduced to me is through, Chris obviously had a big audience, and it was maybe a little bit notable that I got him to do a trad bluegrass record. And so,
Yeah.
because he's, obviously that's where he comes from, grew up with, but like he's, been on this, ever experimental, trip. And, the way I see it is I kind of provided a safe space for him to engage with his love and, background in traditional music. And so we had a good time and toured that, played a lot of the festivals and whatnot for a while. And then, other than that, I've worked probably, other than Chris, I've worked with most is probably Tony Trischka, who, based near New York City in North Jersey. And we've been playing together, probably since 2006, in various iterations. I'm usually backing him up in his band, but we've, done duos, and we have a trio with, me, Tony, and Bruce Malsky. And, it's kind of ongoing. Currently, I've been helping him support his new album, Earl Jam, that came out this past summer and is now nominated for a Grammy. So we've been pretty busy this past year. He's been, hitting the festival circuit with that project. It's usually with me on guitar and vocals, and Jared Engel on bass. And then we have a cast of amazing fiddle players that we, call, including Brittany Haas and Casey Dreesen, Alex Hargraves, and Duncan Wickel, and Shad Cobb, and Nate Lee's done a number of them. So not too far from where you're based now.
Yeah, well, Tony and Bruce have played here, and they're going to play here again soon.
Oh, cool.
I think in February. So it's funny you went to Hampshire College. That seems so far from where you grew up. And I graduated high school in 1971. Okay, and I did not go to college. I decided I was not going to go to college, but that was one of the few places I looked at. It was brand new then. It was very, very progressive, like the most progressive college in the East, probably. It used
to be called a hippie Harvard. Yeah, it's like a design your own major place. And I growing up in Atlanta. Yeah, it was a kind of a culture shock and a climate shock too. I mean, I think the first winter in New England, we had like 120 inches of snow that winter. I'm like, what is going on? You're supposed to be getting daffodils in February, and it was still snowing well into April, and but
different world.
Yeah, different world. But it was a really rich place, and like the primary sort of music education I got there was getting to work with this legendary jazz and experimental musician Yusef Lateef, who's who's incredible. He was a close friend and collaborator of John Coltrane's, and just like a really amazing artist and teacher. Who kind of came out of the jazz world, but it was like it just kind of kept on progressing. Like he didn't adhere to traditional jazz forms. He was making new music all the way up until the time he passed, when he was into his 90s. He was working on his like third symphony or something like that, and amazing.
He was an amazing guy, way out there. I grew up listening to jazz too, so much more than bluegrass. I love jazz. I always did, and I still do. But
well, Yusef was really inspiring on a lot of levels. His really central message to his students was really about, it was kind of twofold. It was searching for new sounds, and, learning to play, music from your own experiences and emotions. And, like just talking about the responsibility that any performer has to, engage with that, within themselves, and, kind of create a resonance with the audience. And that's, as simple as that sounds, he really took that very seriously. And, when you just to be around him or see him perform, it was just, this is a very powerful experience. And so that's something I've really, been inspired by, even though, the form of music I play is different than what we were learning
Right.
at that time. But I would bring my mandolin to class sometime, to his improv class, and after class, I'd play some fiddle tunes or something. So he heard me oh, I see you got this background in tradition, and he was super into the connection that I had to to bluegrass and old time music, and he encouraged me to. He said you should write a bluegrass concerto, which I have not yet done, but maybe someday.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you were playing guitar in his class, or was it more just
Usually,
theory?
yeah.
Guitar?
Yeah, well, he taught an improv class that you could take over and over again. So I probably took about 6 times throughout college. And, the catch was you had to get up and be there at 8 a.m. on Monday morning, which for a college student, that was kind of a tall order. But, if you could manage that, you could go hang and jam with Yusef Lateef, which was a really amazing experience.
Yeah, that's a good morning thing. Wow.
Yeah. And then later on, I took his composition class, and he sat on my kind of senior thesis committee and all that. But a lot of times you just got to play. It was pretty free and open. He'd bring compositions that he was like a sketch or some etude or something. We'd play it down and then kind of go around the room, and everyone would get a chance to improv on it. And he'd sometimes give some prompts or some directions, but it was pretty open. It was more like him leading by example, which it's hard to beat that. Just got to listen and watch and pay attention and be in the moment.
Do you find that your jazz interest or jazz background enters into your bluegrass playing, either consciously or subconsciously?
Well, aspects of that do in terms of like the training that jazz musicians get in improvisation, and like you're expected to have a high degree of flexibility, like to be able to play a tune in any key, to be able to hear something and play it back. And the ability to like really engage with whatever the chord structure that the song is giving you, and kind of work with that. So what I've generally not been interested in is like, oh, how can I put a sharp 9 flat 13 chord over St. Anne's Reel or whatever. Like I'm not that interested in kind of forcing stylistic things together that may or may not go. I mean, I really like traditional hard drive and bluegrass, and playing that. But I would say that the ability to listen and improvise, and that insistence on just making sure that like anything you play is something that you've heard first. There's a discipline to that in jazz, which I think is really strong, and that I think that bluegrass players can really benefit from, even if all you want to do is play like straight ahead bluegrass. And I think one of the reasons is that in bluegrass, especially bluegrass guitarists were the worst in terms of getting stuck in playing licks,
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like you can learn your hot licks, and you kind of hear people to get up and running and play the same hot licks, over kind of in every situation. And so, but I think that the jazz training is kind of gave me ways to, use those things when I want to use them, but have other ways of engaging with the music, and hopefully that's more ear based and less finger, less like based in the habitual patterns that your fingers learn. Right. And so that's facilitates how I'm able to like play and interact with people in a live setting. And for instance, like the project with Chris Thile, the container is always just like we're just playing traditional songs. It might be a fiddle tune, or it could be, Del McCurry something or other. But the improvs, can kind of go in a bunch of different directions within the container of that song. And so I definitely credit the jazz, background in being able to function kind of on the fly. And Chris is like one of the quickest musical thinkers that you would ever experience. Like if I'm like starting to think an idea, like he's already picked up on it and is like responding to it. It's uncanny. Yeah. He's so in the moment and so quick, and not just like quick in terms of playing fast, but like his mind works so quickly that he like he's just constantly picking up on stuff that I'm doing, and so like it becomes this this spontaneous conversation, and
yeah.
To be able
it's funny.
Like,
that's what I always love most about duos is that a good duo, you're looking at each other and listening, and it's so much. You hear something and it comes out in your solo, then he's already on it doing something else, but it's relating to what you just did. This is all this trade-off, which I just love hearing and love watching, because usually there's a lot of happiness in the faces, when you're doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan. That's probably my favorite musical format, and I've had the opportunity to do duos with a number of amazing musicians, and Chris included. Especially guitar mandolin or guitar fiddle or guitar banjo. Like the guitar can be the bass player, or then you can go into lead. So this can be a very complete sound. But for me, part of it's on a practical level that like it's a lot easier to put up a duo show with someone. If we're traveling through and like you don't have we're not like working out rehearsing for weeks on end to like perfect our thing. But you can get together with a great player and play standards and have it be a fun conversation. So that's worked for me as being someone who's kind of based in New York. I've never like prioritized touring. So being in New York has kind of allowed me to just kind of be in a place where people are passing through, and I've had the opportunity to set things up with a bunch of people
yeah,
who were passing through. Yeah. And so you can kind of get up and running with the duo pretty quick. And so that's worked well for me. And I also love the vocal harmonies, and that it's all about the listening, and this makes it a constant conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas in a band setting, you can kind of go on autopilot a little bit, but you can't go on autopilot.
People cover for you, and there's just two of you. You can't really hide because you can't stop playing.
Yeah. And I feel like they have like there's more potential to prod and tease and egg each other on, like kind of like tell musical jokes back and forth, and you can really energize the situation. So
yeah, that becomes very apparent to the audience too, and that it brings them into the whole thing. Like these are just two people having fun doing what they love to do, and they're so good at it, and they're enjoying it. Lots of times bands are up there seriously playing and no one's smiling and they're looking it down, and there's not too much chit chat between songs. It's a lot of bands these days, I think, are very serious, which is fine. But I like, you like to be entertained and brought into the mood of the players. And I think a duo, if it's good, really does that.
Yeah,
brings people in. I've seen some of your on YouTube clips of you teaching, and I'm wondering if your teaching style was more influenced by Yusef Lateef and your time with him than even maybe your playing style. You have a very patient way of teaching, from what I can see. It's
Yeah. Well, I enjoy teaching and have done a whole lot of it. I'm joking that I'm kind of getting near retirement age, because I've been teaching full time for 25 years now, and 20 over, a little over, and fortunately I enjoy it. As far as my teaching, it's like a lot of emphasis on ear training, like all the like private students, who they go through a kind of a curriculum of ear training, like even they're using their voices, even the ones that don't think of them as singers, sort of accidentally made a lot of singers, people who discover they can actually sing through doing vocal ear training exercises. But really the goal is to, again, get to where you can hear something in your head and play that thing. This is really important to me. And then, that, and another part of what I emphasize is paying attention to original detail, I transcribe a lot of source recordings, vocal stuff for sure. And, sometimes guitar breaks or mandolin breaks or whatever, but to really, and that goes hand in hand with listening. And the goal is not to you're not going to sound like Bill Monroe. There's no risk of actually sounding like Bill Monroe, but if you can learn something that he's playing or singing with as much detail as you can muster, it's like a really good ear training thing, because it's forcing you to listen to detail, which is something that we need to do when we interact with other musicians in a live setting. And also just, there's so much richness certainly to the vocal tradition. Instrumentalists tend to not pay attention enough, I think, to, the richness and complexity of vocal ornamentation and phrasing and whatnot. And, but I think so much is expressed in the details. So, the more I think the more we can get students listening to original detail, and pick something that Hazel Dickens sings or Jimmy Martin or whomever, and try to emulate it. It's going to improve your ear, but also kind of get your sense of like balance and delivery and all that. And then, that doesn't mean like every song you have to like mimic, the
That's
classics,
interesting.
but like to pick a few things here and there where you like really go deep, I think is really,
I mean, a lot of teachers and musicians will say, I'm sure Bill Monroe too, play the melody. If you're soloing, play the melody. That's the place to start, maybe even stay with. But I've heard you on some of your lessons, you're not just playing the melody, you're actually playing the slides and slurs, like you're playing it on your instrument like it's a vocal. Which I never really thought about that before, but you're actually trying to sing the line on your instrument in a way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way I see it, that is the melody when you're talking about bluegrass style, because if you take away the slides and the ornamentation, the lonesome sigh of a train going by makes me want to stop and cry. Like without all it doesn't sound at all like bluegrass. It actually needs to be the lonesome sigh of a train going by, and so on. Like that, all that contour is that is the music. So
right.
I think the more like at least in bluegrass and country stuff. So like I think the more that instrumentalists especially can pay attention to those movements and try to mimic that on the instrument, it lends a lot of richness to the playing. B, it kind of puts you like right in the heart of the song. C, it gives you something like really real to play that doesn't involve necessarily a lot of pyrotechnics, like playing a lot of like fast stuff. But like if you can, actually state, the vocal melody with as much of that natural, that ornamentation and movement and rhythm, syncopation is a big part of it too. You can, the less other stuff you need to add to an instrumental break to make it sound complete and real and appropriate for the style. So I think it's actually a really good way of, for students to get into it who are not, maybe who are like new-ish to the instrument or just don't have the facility to play really fast. But if you can focus on the ornamentation, it's like then you can be doing the thing, for real. And hopefully your technical skills will come along as well. But
it's funny. I usually ask people, how has your playing style changed over the years? And I asked this to Todd Phillips on one of my podcasts, and he said, well, I try and play a lot less notes, but I try and play the right ones. When I look back at my early recordings, when I was just playing so much bass and so many notes, he said, first of all, I can't play that anymore. And second of all, I wouldn't. I would pick out some of the notes that were key, but I wouldn't, I thought that was a good answer, interesting answer.
Yeah. Yeah, the more kind of purposeful and intentional you are, the fewer, fewer notes you need to make a statement.
Right. So getting back to the guitar, which I guess is your main, you play mandolin, I know, and probably banjo and other things too, but guitar is your main act. So, and I assume you probably listened, like most bluegrass guys, to Tony Rice growing up, Clarence White, Tony Rice. Did you? Was he?
Surprisingly, actually, Tony, who I love, is someone has been largely absent as far as like influence from my guitar playing, and like until fairly recently, and I think through teaching, been offering all these Zoom classes on like doing kind of deep dives into classic guitar records. So I've like taught classes now on Manzanita, the Blake and Rice, first Blake and Rice record, the Skaggs and Rice record, the Church Street Blues record, and really gone deep into the details of Tony's playing. But that's like been within the last 5 or 6 years. And, there's several reasons for that sort of just Tony not being on my radar. Again, it's not that I don't love it, but I think I heard Clarence first and totally fell in love with Clarence. And I think as a teenager, like growing up in Atlanta, in the early 90s, like the Tony Rice influence, like around me was like so strong. Like it was kind of the peak of his influence. So like all the guitar players at the jams were just like doing Tony Rice licks and like usually kind of badly. Like, like there's like this syndrome of kind of like, there's like the low hanging fruit of like those blues licks, which are great hot licks, and they're not that hard in the grand scheme of things to to learn to play some of those. It's near impossible to play them with the rhythmic precision and tone and touch that Tony Rice plays them with. But anyway, so like I was kind of like, I heard a lot of that, and like I'm like, okay, this, and I hadn't heard much actual Tony Rice is the problem. And the first Tony Rice recording I heard was the Grisman Hot Dog record. Grisman Quintet, and that's, got Stefan Grappelli, and this was like at a time when like I was like really, I had been exposed to like Western swing and Django Reinhardt, Charlie Christian, and like was maybe starting to hear a little bit of Wes Montgomery or something. Maybe basically I was like, I wanted to learn how to play over chord changes, and I was like really interested in like how do, jazz and swing players function, when the harmony's changing, and, like I was totally lost. Like if I was tried to play over a jazz standard that modulated, I would like have no idea what to do. And so I was like really like wanting to hear guitar players who were like really adept at working with harmony. And the thing is like, that's not where Tony Rice was on that record. What he was bringing to that project was just an incredible tone and timing and just like unique sound, but he wasn't really playing over the chord changes in the way that any of those, like those other guitars. And it was like, it's just like like a window of, kind of window, like as you're, especially when you're young and you're learning, like windows kind of open, close, like there's like windows of receptivity. And like, so like, I just heard Tony Rice doing like, not at his strongest, that wasn't like, basically if I'd heard Manzanita at that same moment, I probably would have been totally sold, but I had not heard Manzanita until much later, so I just like, okay, it's cool, but it's not like for me, and that's not what I'm listening to. And I already love Clarence, and I'd also, the other guitar record that always blew my mind was the Bill Monroe and Doc Watson live recordings on Smithsonian. So like between Clarence and Bill and Doc, like I kind of felt like I had my inspiration for guitar. But other than that, actually, I've always been more interested in listening to other instruments than guitar players. I mean, Monroe particularly, but banjo wise, I'm just like, my favorite banjo player has pretty much always been Ralph Stanley. I know that's unorthodox. You're supposed to say Scruggs, but I love Ralph. Ralph is my guy.
Yeah.
And fiddlers, like Tex Logan, for instance, has always been hugely inspirational. And for the first time I heard him on those, again, the Smithsonian discs with, him sitting in with Bill Monroe on like Fire on the Mountain and playing Katie Hill and all that stuff. There's this incredible pulsation, just like drives me nuts. I just can't get enough. And so I mean that like so I get a lot of inspiration from other instruments, not necessarily guitar. And I think that's actually one of the compelling things about guitar is that you are able to get aspects of banjo and of mandolin and of fiddle and bass and the vocal onto the guitar. So I think it's kind of, I find it more compelling as kind of an absorptive, like a substrate to absorb the sounds from all the other, bluegrass instruments and to kind of try to voice that onto the guitar is sort of what compelling, to me. And I think that's part of one of the reasons I like Clarence so much is that I feel like Clarence's biggest influence was probably Earl Scruggs. He listened to some to Doc, but I think he already had like a lead style, I think, by the time he heard Doc. So like, it's not like you don't have Clarence because of Doc. He there was some influence there, but like he was already well on his way developing his own guitar style before Doc came on the scene. And he had like, listened to, been mentored by Joe Maphis and Merle Travis, who are also kind of outside of the bluegrass tradition. But, the Kentucky Colonel, he and his brother Roland and Eric White, they grew up playing music together, and they had bass, mandolin, and guitar, but no banjo. So I think Clarence's style kind of developed trying to like fill the gaps where a banjo would be. And Billy Ray Latham didn't come into the picture until, a little bit later. So anyways, I just love that about his playing. It's like that you can't make a guitar sound exactly like a banjo, but it can be really interesting trying.
Yeah. The guitar is pretty flexible. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff on it you can't do on other instruments, that's for sure. I remember talking to Tony Rice a few times. He played here quite a few times, and Um, he would talk about jazz all the time. And
Uh-huh.
he loved Oscar Peterson, who was
Yeah.
one of my favorite jazz pianists, my favorite
Yeah.
jazz pianist. And I'm interested because both Tony and Oscar Peterson, when they were at certain points in their career, a lot of their solos were they were riff based. In other words, they had all these riffs that they had mastered, and
Hmm.
they were beautiful in time and spectacular and fast and
Hmm.
amazing. But you listen to Oscar Peterson, you hear him play, you know right away it's him because he's got this sound and
Yeah.
style. Same with Tony Rice, especially on faster stuff. I personally like listening to Tony Rice play a solo on a ballad or a slow song.
Yeah.
That's to me, I mean, like you say, you've heard every Tony Rice like so many times, and you still do with every guitar player. But
Hmm.
to hear him play, a soft, sad, melodic kind of solo to
Yeah.
me was all emotion, and I
Yeah.
loved it.
Green Light on the Southern, or any of the
Yeah,
stuff on the Skaggs and Rice record. Well, he doesn't play much
yeah,
lead on there, but yeah, I agree.
right.
Yeah. That's in this. I've learned so much about Tony in his world through teaching on it, and like having when I teach Zoom classes on do like a deep dive Zoom class on a particular record, I'll always have special guests, and so I've had Daryl Anger and Todd Phillips, and Chris Eldridge, who've spent a lot of time with Tony, Tim Stafford, all coming in and weighing in on Tony's style, and they all talked about how deeply Tony listened to music, and he had this amazing stereo setup in his basement, like tube amps and like big Altec speakers and an oscilloscope to get it all optimized. And he was very, very serious about listening. And if you hung out with Tony, you just listened deeply. And one of the things that I think, I don't know if it's Critter or maybe it could have been Daryl or Todd, but I've asked them about that experience of listening to music with Tony Rice, and especially about his interest in jazz. And I think it's what I got from about his interest in jazz is that you hear just so much uniqueness. Like I think what you touched on this is like you hear like 4 or 5 notes of Oscar Peterson or McCoy Tyner, who's another player that Tony's really tuned into. You know who it is. If you hear Miles Davis play 2 notes, it's Miles Davis and not Lee Morgan or Dizzy Gillespie or something. And it seems like Tony really appreciated just that utter uniqueness of voice and character that those great jazz musicians were bringing into it. And I, just I talked about, Yusef Lateef's idea of like this responsibility that musicians have to play from their own experiences and emotions. And I think kind of a related similar thing. I mean, I think the responsibility that Tony took really seriously is, playing like from your own sound, and cultivating, playing something as only you can play it. And Tony, I mean, obviously, he's often imitated, but you're like, again, you hear Tony, like actual Tony, and like exactly who it is, and like his unique sound, his voice, so it comes through so strongly. And I feel like there's not as much of that in the bluegrass tradition as there was in like classic jazz stuff. And I think part of that's just the influence of the traditionalism, in our our way of revering the original greats, and I'm totally on board with that process, and as we've talked about. But part of what made those people great is that you could you know exactly who it is. Just their unique voice was just loud and clear.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but yeah, that's the cool thing about jazz is that was was part of the value, especially up until about the 70s.
That's true. I mean, yeah, well, classic bluegrass and classic jazz, you hear 1 or 2 notes by many of these people, and you know exactly who it is.
Yeah,
And that's their signature sound, and that's kind of what makes them amazing because they can capture in 3 notes, you know, what they're
yeah,
doing, and it's them, and it sucks you right in. I
yeah,
always love that about
yep.
good players. Yeah. So there's an old adage in bluegrass that there's no money above the 5th fret on guitar.
Yeah.
You don't seem to really subscribe to that. Because you seem to be comfortable all over the neck of the guitar. When you play guitar, you seem to have lots of times you don't even use a capo. You just play out of the whatever chord position, and you go up and down the neck all over the place.
Uh-huh.
That seems to be your style. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, yeah, I do use a capo sometimes, but I definitely enjoy exploring, guitar positions, beyond the kind of the typical G and C forms.
Mhm.
I use a lot of E without a capo, and eventually and F, occasionally B flat. Like there's tunes like New Camptown Races and Daly's Reel that are B flat tunes that I actually really like playing in B flat, using open strings without a capo. But and B, I actually like B without a capo for certain things. Like on my last record, Orchids and Violence, the opening track there is June Apple, and I'm playing that in B with no capo, and that's just because I really liked how the open strings hit, and also on a guitar like in the key of B, when you go to your 4 chord, you get to use that low E note, so like you get to it gets you deeper down into the bass range than if you were capoed. But yeah, so it's I like exploring just like the resonances of like how the open strings are hitting in different places and in different keys, and I think the ability to do that kind of came partially from the I was talking about earlier, and that the value within jazz music of like you should be able to play something in any key, but that is something I practice. That's kind of my go-to practice routine. Is if I have 20 minutes, I'll pick a fiddle tune I know, I'll turn on a metronome and play it through 12 keys in open position without the capo, and the generally you're not going to ever have to play Whiskey Before Breakfast in E flat, but it's a good exercise because it kind of goes back to that idea, like once leaving the muscle memory behind of wherever your fingers have memorized it. If you go to another key, then you're having to rely instead on like what your ear is telling you about the tune. So I just think of it as an ear training exercise, and it's a way of just kind of keeping the lines of communication open. Again, like that back to that thing of like I want to be able to hear something in my head and play it. That's something I draw on when I improvise. But if you're taking a fiddle tune, it's still the sound of that tune, and just figuring it out, like how does it lay out on the instrument? It can really kind of breaks down the barriers of key, and I think helps me kind of just get my thoughts clearer onto the fingerboard. But
Yeah.
as far as going up
It's
the
what-
neck, it sort of depends on the context. I, if I'm in a duo situation, yeah, I'll go up the neck, someone else is backing me up. But, I've also, did all these hundreds of solo shows, just me. And so, when it's just me, often I'll kind of stay in lower forms and, try to kind of get melodies out of chord shapes and, with open note drones. But
Right. I was going to ask you about practice because I've talked to some musicians who say, I don't practice, I just play. If I sit down by myself, I just feel like I'm playing. I'm not
Mhm.
working on a specific scales or chords or whatever. It sounds like you might do some actual practicing. You probably just sit down and wing it sometimes too, correct?
Yeah, I think it's it's good to have practice routine that's fairly short and manageable and kind of addresses the things that are gonna move you forward and kind of help you react in the moment when you get into a playing situation. But I think it's also good along with that to program in some time to just play. It shouldn't all be like eating your vegetables. So like if I've if I spend 15, 20 minutes doing ear training or cross picking or whatever, then if I have more time, yeah, I'll just play. I'll just play a tune I've liked, or just kind of like improvise something or write something or just play along with the record. And I think it's good to have that balance.
Yeah. When you're playing along or practicing or just hanging out playing the guitar, do you often do something and say, "Oh, I never did that before," like, and then go back to it like I just learned something, or is it just go into your memory and it kind of comes out later?
Yeah, I'll usually like get at my phone and just record a voice memo, just try to remember it. So I have a whole library of voice memos, and so a lot of it's kind of composition based. Like if I've come up with like, oh, that could be the start of a tune or a piece of it. And so I kind of keep a library of musical nuggets and sometimes we'll go back to listen to them to remind me myself of what that was. And then like, as I'm listening, kind of try to maybe further develop the idea. But
yeah, I was just talking with Ronnie Simpkins,
nice.
and we were talking about playing bass and getting in the pocket, with the bass. And I said, who do you key off of? Yeah. I said, who do you key off of? Do you key off the mandolin? Or he goes, no, I always key off the guitar. He said that, of course, he had Tony and Wyatt Rice for a while when he was in that band as a rhythm section. So that was a pretty good group to key off of. But he said, no, I listen to the guitar. That's where I try to find my spot. Do you think that's a good, I don't know. I was kind of surprised. I kind of thought he would say the mandolin or something, but no, he said that.
No, I feel that way too. I mean, I feel like, a good mandolin player just kind of takes care of things and, and then so like they're, placing the backbeat or whatever, wherever it needs to be. But yeah, I tend to, cue on the bass myself more as a guitar player. And certainly like if I'm leading a jam session, if I want there to be a strong bass player there and I want to be standing right next to them. Because I think like if the bass and I can kind of get things solid, then like I feel like things will kind of fall into place around us, and it's like I feel like that in the band as well.
Do you think the role of rhythm guitar has changed a lot from the days of like Jimmy Martin and Lester Flatt, or is it still basically just keeping the pocket rhythm going?
Oh yeah, well I mean there's definitely an evolution. I mean if you go back further than that, I mean to like Charlie Monroe and some of the players kind of coming more out of old time, like Riley Puckett and they're basically the bass players. It wasn't a bass player, and so Charlie Monroe plays like dum 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 dum, and you're just barely hearing any chord. And part of that is because Charlie played with a thumb pick, and then like the strum was just with his bare fingers, so it was lighter. But also Bill Monroe, his brother, was just shredding on the mandolin on the upper end. But I really like the old school, kind of old time thing with heavy bass run. And then with starting with Jimmy Martin, Jimmy kind of brought a strummier thing, and I'm a huge fan of Jimmy and his rhythm. It's got this kind of like rockabilly, influence, a lot of kind of blues and swagger there. And then I think, and then like contemporarily, I say contemporarily by bluegrass standards, but like from the '90s on, you kind of have, Dan Tyminski kind of built on the Jimmy Martin thing. And has I think his style is like very different than Doc or certainly any of the early people. It's much more strum heavy. I feel like it kind of borrows more on like the sonic elements of country, like full band country music, and kind of bringing more of those kind of textures and rhythmic emphasis into the bluegrass setting. So, and I think that's kind of been the dominant rhythm guitar style contemporarily. It's very effective. I mean, Dan's amazing, his timing and his interaction with the band. But, I still tend to, for me personally, I draw a lot more on the old school, and I'm much more bass heavy. And part of that is wanting to stay out of the way of my own vocals, because if you strum, too much or too loudly on the upper end of the guitar, you're like right in the same tonal range as a vocal. So I tend to put more emphasis on the lower end of the guitar, so it's, kind of creates room for the voice.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've watched and heard a lot of Tony Rice's rhythm playing, especially, which I love. And he seems to spend most of his time on the three high strings on the guitar in rhythm. He's, a lot of his rhythm patterns and strums and voicings are with, G, B, and E string, and not as much on the low three. At least that was my observation. Like he spends a lot of time up there on those strings when he's playing.
Well, again, it depends on the context. I mean, he also does, he has this incredible stuff with bass runs and, especially syncopated bass runs. I think a lot of that, his relationship with the low end of the guitar comes a lot more from Clarence.
Mm-hmm.
But again, context wise, if you look at like the Skaggs and Rice record, you're hearing so little strumming on that record.
Right.
You know, it's just like boom, boom, boom. You're just like hearing this huge, big, warm, supportive bass thing, and just you just kind of brings like just like a little fill like in between the vocal phrases, and it's a totally different sound than Tony Rice plays and sings bluegrass. When he's just shredding and hitting it hard with the full band. But Tony was just one of the best listeners of anyone, and like anyone who worked with him, talks just about how like the Tony effect. When Tony showed up and was playing rhythm in the band, it was just elevating everything. Made everyone play their best, and so I think that's partially just because he was not that prescriptive about what he was doing. He was just so interactive with the music that was being made. So he had a pretty wide toolkit and the ears and the sense of timing to execute it. But he really, he pumped so much energy and inspiration into, the people he was playing with. It was undoubtable. I unfortunately never got to play with him. I met him a couple times, but Tony this was like in the early aughts, and he was, kind of become, he was always pretty quiet, I gather, but he had become pretty recessed, It was like when he was touring with Peter Rowan, and had to open some shows for that duo and then quartet. And Peter, of course, is very gregarious, and like Peter and I hit it off and sang and picked, and we talk on the phone sometimes. But like, Tony was like, he was very sweet, but like kind of in his world. And I wish I had gotten a chance to experience that, that push that everyone talks about. But
there's one moment in one of the recordings he did with Peter on YouTube of White Dove, and it was, I think, well after Tony was had stopped singing, but he does come around to the mic and sing the baritone part with Peter and Bryn Davies on White Dove, and of course the crowd goes crazy, and because it was so unexpected, but it was so. It was so beautiful. I mean, Tony was to me also not only the greatest guitarist, but one of the greatest singers.
Oh, absolutely.
And, hear that low voice of his coming there was just like, gave me chills.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I wish I had been in the room and, in that IBMA and whenever that was, 2018?
I think it was like 2013 or something. It was a while. It was a long time ago.
I was thinking like when
but I've seen the video.
Yeah. When he, gave the speech.
Do you obsess about guitar picks like a lot of guitar players, or you just have one that you like?
I think it's hard to be a flat picker without obsessing about guitar picks. I try, every type of pick that I can get my hands on. And the ones I always come back to are the Wiegans, which I've been using for years. So I like the regular, kind of teardrop guitar shape Wiegans and the 1.2 thickness. And sometimes I use the tri-corners. And I have other picks. Like I have, I'm friends of the Frank Sullivan, who's given me several of the tone slab picks, which are amazing. And I've had blue chip picks before, like a Red Bear. I have some natural picks, but I always like, for my style, I keep on gravitating back to the Wiegans, and I think that it's because I play really hard. Like, as I sing loud and I hit hard. And like, I think a lot of the boutique picks, like the blue chips in particular, are really best suited for more delicate, people who play the guitar more appropriately than I do. Because I think that like those, particularly with the blue chips, I mean, they're amazing. But like, I find that when I hit really hard with them, which I tend to do, they kind of get a little glassy sounding. And it's partially that's also because the instruments I prefer tend to be a little more honking rather than like big kind of warm, D28 style instruments. I tend to like, mahogany instruments that like punch a lot, and that sometimes it's like just not always the best balance. But again, like the pick, you really got to like match the pick to the guitar, to how you're playing it, into the string and the context, and it's just like it's good to I try to be, have a arsenal.
Right.
Today I'm playing the tone slab here that Frank gave me, and really because I think my strings are really dead on my J35, and it's
You
doing
can
just
bring the
the
music
trick.
out better with that.
It's bringing it's bringing them to life. So yeah.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to a recording session, I'll bring a whole bunch of different picks, and and sometimes some files. Like if I need to, I'll work the edges a little bit.
Yep.
If I need.
Yeah. Wow, there's so many questions I did not get to answer. It's an hour here. I might want to have you back again. I didn't really get into singing very much, and a lot of stuff on my question list.
Well, I'm long-winded, so.
Well, no, I mean it's good. That's the whole reason I do this, to have people talk about themselves and their music. Just what's coming up in your musical world soon? Any special events or things going on? You wanna...
Jacob Jolliffe and I made a duo record. It's a tribute to Jim and Jesse, Virginia boys. It's just the two of us, speaking of guitar mandolin duos, I've been working with Jake a bunch in recent years. And so, we made this record. It's in the can. It hasn't come out yet. So we're about to figure out what that release is going to look like. Hopefully it'll come out, early next year, or, early middle of next year, and we'll, get that music out there. But I love Jim and Jesse. And Jake's voice is he's like got a really steady sort of laser beam style voice, which is perfect for Jim and Jesse stuff. My voice is like more like a loose cannon. Like it's actually kind of more in like the Monroe or, Jimmy Martin style, but singing that stuff with Jake is a good match. So that's exciting. And I'll continue to play with Tony Trischka, and I have a kind of a solo project that I've just been in development for actually kind of a long time right now. It's all music from Atlanta, where I grew up. Some music by and from people I kind of knew and was learned from growing up. So hoping to figure out a way to get that recorded and out there, and that'll be a full band record featuring a bunch of fiddlers. And Tony Trischka on low-tuned banjos exclusively.
Speaking of fiddlers, I've noticed, and I've she's never played here, and I would love to have you and her come play here. But Brittany Haas, when I've seen some of your videos, and when she comes up and starts playing the fiddle and on solo, the whole place just erupts because she brings some kind of energy. I don't know what it is, but it's just like, oh my God. It just transforms everything to a whole new level.
Well, she's like, for my money, she's just she's the probably favorite fiddler working today. And I mean, there are a bunch of wonderful fiddlers out there who have amazing, are amazing artists, but just what she brings together in her style is the stuff that I like the most, which is she's got such a strong pulsation from old time fiddle. She had, been mentored by Bruce Malsky, who's also one of my favorite fiddlers. But she can also, improvise and, play in any key, and has got this very expansive, melodic and harmonic vocabulary. So just for me, just that there's like I love it when she can like really rage, like
that's a good way.
I like it when she plays angry.
Yeah,
because there's so much power in her bow arm, and there's so much emotion behind it. But she's just one of my favorite musicians to play with. Period. And it's just like there's that common appreciation of kind of old time music and timing, and putting that into but it's insane what she can do. And
I mean, she died. I've heard her like on
a musical situation. Yeah,
I've heard her. You play June Apple. Okay, it's one of the on YouTube, and she dived into the solo like full speed ahead, and the crowd just goes. The energy is unbelievable. It's the rhythm. It just comes. The whole thing comes alive instantly after one bow stroke.
Totally. Talk about a player who you like. And instantly who it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just definitely I think he's one of the great musicians of our time, and just definitely one of my favorite musicians to play with. I wish she was still in the Northeast, but I always appreciate when we get to work together.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if you're ever in the area, want to gig, we'd love to have you guys come do a duo show sometime.
Oh, awesome! That would be super fun.
I really want to thank you for coming on. Like I say, there's a whole page and a half of questions. I want to talk more about singing and harmony and all that kind of stuff, and maybe we can do another episode, because I really like to get in. I know you love singing as much as playing, it seems like.
Oh yeah, and, totally. I should mention that there's my Artist Works school. That's got the Bluegrass vocals section there on Artist Works.
Yep.
So that's been a lot of fun. That started in 2016, and so one of the things I've gotten to do there is like build this interview library. Talking to all these legends. I've gotten to talk to Jesse McReynolds, Mac Wiseman, Bobby Osborne, Peter Owen, Laurie Lewis, Rhonda Vincent, Tim O'Brien, Del McCurry, on and on. So learned a tremendous amount myself. Getting to talk to these people. As part of that curriculum. So.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. I mean, that's why I like this podcast, because I've gotten to talk to a lot of my musical heroes too, and it's just amazing. I mean, everyone is so knowledgeable and different and has their own views on stuff. But a lot of the views are similar, but they all had different experiences growing up and playing, and it's just, I don't know. I guess that's what I love about Bluegrass, is that everybody is so talented but so approachable and willing to talk about their music, their feelings, their this and that. It's pretty unusual.
Yeah. Well, it's community-based music, and it's history-based too. We're all nurtured by the tradition and sort of nerd out about the history of things as we're trying to make our way in the contemporary world as well. So there's lots to talk about.
Yes, there is. Yes. Well, thank you very much, Michael, for coming on. I've learned a lot. I'm sure people will enjoy listening to this, and maybe we'll chat again sometime. There's so much more I want to find out from you.
Great. Well, thanks,
especially
Chris.
About the singing aspect.
Yes. Well, to be continued.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Take care. I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.